Sitting in the front seat of a rental car, Birdie Baker carefully applied her candy red lipstick. She needed to look her best, for the photographers gathered outside the prison. That had been easier when she was younger, of course. Though, Lord knows Birdie had never had much in the looks department, a fact her mother never failed to mention. Checking her reflection in the sun visor mirror, Birdie nodded to herself, then grabbed her purse from the passenger seat and stepped out. Her heels clicked on the pavement as she made her way from the visitor's lot over to the security checkpoint at the prison's main entrance, aware that she was being watched through the chain-link fence over at the media zone, where reporters mingled with the many protesters who were gathering.
"Think you'll get the bastard to confess, Miss Baker? It would be 3 for 3.
Someone called to her.
"When's the new book coming out?"
Asked someone else.
"Think it'll win you another Pulitzer?"
Birdie didn't answer, but she smiled politely in their direction, glancing up at the signs held by chanting hippies and stern-faced nuns who had come to protest. The slogans on their signs were the typical nonsense. "Capital punishment equals murder. Vengeance belongs to the Lord. The system is the real butcher." Birdie rolled her eyes, then allowed a CO to hold the door open for her as she walked inside the prison, feeling equal measures of nerves and excitement about the task at hand. This would be the third time she had spoken with a condemned serial killer on the day of their execution. And if the results of the previous 2 interviews were any indication, the reporters outside would be in for a doozy of a headline. Before Birdie Baker walked back to the car that evening, she would do it. She had to do it. She had to get a confession out of that maniac, Sean Mingus, aka the long-haul butcher. And then she would finally have what she needed to write the last chapter in her latest true crime masterpiece. Deep in the bleak white bowels of death row, the other prisoners watched on from behind bars in respectful silence as the guards brought the convicted mass killer out of his cell and marched him, shackles jingling, around the corner to the visitation room for the last time. They brought the man inside, switched on the lights, and grunted for him to take one of the 2 plastic chairs set on either side of the table. Sighing, he sat. The guards checked the restraints on his ankles and wrists, clipped the chains to the restraint anchors in both the floor and the table, then retreated to the hall. In his chair, the prisoner hung his head, folded his hands in his lap, and tried to focus on his breathing, to stay calm, to stay in the moment. That was important. After all, he didn't have many moments left. He could practically feel the time slipping away, like water in his cupped hands, dripping through his calloused fingers and evaporating in the harsh fluorescent lights of the prison, going so fast. But he wasn't all that thirsty. He just needed a teeny tiny sip of that time, just enough to get answers, and to finally understand why he was in chains, why his life had fallen apart, and why today would be his last day on Earth. The unmistakable clop, clop, clop of high heels sounded from the hall. Then, the petite figure of Birdie Baker entered the visitation room. "Good afternoon, Sean," she said, standing just inside the door. The prisoner did not look over, but kept his head bowed as he answered. "Howdy, Miss Baker. What we gonna talk about today, I wonder? Murder? My childhood? Maybe the weather?" Nodding for the guards to leave, Birdie walked around the table to the second chair in the room and sat, just as the door swung shut and locked with a click. Then, it was just the pair of them, in the center of those 4 blank walls, under the glare of the fluorescent tube lights above. And what a pair they made. Little Birdie Baker with her salt and pepper perm, her bookish glasses, and her canary yellow cardigan, like some school librarian. And hulking Sean Mingus, in his gray prison jumpsuit, with his shaved head and his big hairy hands, like a lumberjack in chains. Sean's face had that unique half-and-half look common to truckers. The left side was creased and slightly sagged, weathered by years of sun damage, while the right side had been spared the accelerated aging. Setting her purse on the table, Birdie cleared her throat.
I've come to visit you 13 times now, Sean. 13 is my lucky number, you know. Yet you still call me Miss Baker. I keep telling you, it's Birdie.
Sean looked up and met her eyes.
My mama raised me right. I am respectful of my elders, ma'am.
Behind her glasses, Birdie's eyelids flinched, even as she smiled sweetly.
Indeed she did.
Reaching inside her purse, she drew out a battery-powered relic of the early 2000s, a digital voice recorder.
Do you mind if I record our session today, Sean?
He glanced over at the little device and shrugged.
You know, you can just use an iPhone for that now. I reckon that'd be easier.
Oh, you know I don't have a cell phone. And yes, I know. It's very old-fashioned of me. But technology and I are like teeth and tin foil. Put them together and eek. No, thank you.
Clicking record on the device, she leaned back in her seat and took a deep breath.
So then, how are we today, Sean?
He was silent for a few long seconds, watching the little red light on the recorder.
How are we?
He finally said, his voice flat.
In a couple hours, they're gonna strap me onto a gurney. The doc will put needles in my arms and give me a drug that makes my whole dang body numb. That way, when they fill me up with their poison, the people watching on the other side of that there two-way mirror won't see all the pain I'm in as I die.
He blinked, then whipped his gaze from the red light back to the woman's eyes.
So how do you think I feel?
Yes, well, I get your point. And I didn't exactly expect to find you all merry and bright, but negativity comes in all sorts of flavors.
Sean's mouth curled at the corners, and he sniffed a little laugh.
Laugh all you want, Sean, but I'll remind you that this isn't the first time I've sat across the table from an inmate, facing their end, nor is it the second. And the two men in those previous meetings, they had different reactions to their dire circumstances.
Okay then. So how did they feel? Your first two?
Sean narrowed his eyes.
Thomas and Raj.
Birdie's forehead creased ever so slightly, her carefully plucked eyebrows pulling down at the corners as she tilted her head, but she composed herself quickly.
Well, I'm surprised to hear you bring them up. You've never shown any interest in my earlier work before, or the subjects of my first two books.
Actually, ma'am, they have always interested me. That's why I requested your books from the prison library. But they took a long time to finally come.
He nodded.
You're a darn fine writer, Miss Baker. I can see why you have so many fans, including the warden here.
Birdie leaned forward over the table.
Do you mean to say that you've actually read them? A dozen pretty heads, and hands red with lady blood? Intriguing.
Sean smiled again.
I can read, you know, ma'am. Not too fast, sure. And some of them big words are a bit tricky. But ooh yes, I read 'em. In fact, I finished Lady Blood just this morning. Stayed up all night. And if the new book you're writing now, the one about me and about the long haul murders, well, if it's half as good as the first two, I reckon you got another bestseller on the way. Too bad it doesn't have a title yet.
She swallowed, then played off his comment with a shrug.
I assume you are referring to the pattern of my book titles, and the fact that the first two...
Those books were named after the last words of the subjects involved. Yes, ma'am. I think I'm finally starting to get a grasp on your patterns, Miss Baker. Speaking of...
Sean brought his hands up from his lap. The chains rattled against the edge of the table as he crossed his arms.
You still haven't answered my question. On the day of his execution, how did poor Thomas feel? And how did poor Raj feel on the day of his death? Surely you remember that. Those were big days for your, career. Just like today will be.
There was something in his expression that unnerved her. Some quality in the eyes. A sort of hunger. Yes, Birdie made a mental note to jot that down when she left today. It could be an impactful visual for the book. The last thing his victims must have seen before his blade fell. The hungry eyes of Sean Mingus.
Very well then. You want to know how they felt?
She straightened her glasses.
Thomas Gibbons. Well, Thomas was angry on his last day. Absolutely livid. Bright red in the face, like a sunburn. And he wouldn't stop screaming, poor soul. Screaming at the guards, at the other prisoners, at me, at God. Until he confessed, that is. Doing that, admitting to his sins. It calmed him down, Sean. I think it was a relief for him, after all those years denying his crimes, to finally put the record straight before it was too late.
Sean's eyebrows rose.
Must have been a big moment for you, too. After all that effort you put into interviewing him, to be the one to get that grisly confession of his. And what about Raj? Sharav, nah, I can't pronounce his name. What was he feeling?
Raj Sharvan Mukherjee.
Birdie had spoken the name many, many times on tour for her second book. It came easily to her tongue.
Raj was scared. He cried and he cried and he cried like an infant. You could hear it all over the prison. Haunting. Harrowing.
And when you got Raj to confess, did he stop crying then? Did it make him feel less afraid, Miss Baker, to finally put the record straight, as it were?
Birdie didn't answer. She stared at the prisoner across the table, searching for the reason behind the conversation's unexpected direction.
Is that gonna be your same pitch to me today?
He went on.
Are you gonna tell me that if I confess to the 12 brutal murders for which I have been sentenced to die, I will finally be free of my anger and my fear?
You don't seem angry today, Sean, or frightened. You seem, I don't know.
At peace? Well, I'm mostly resolved to my fate by this point. But there are still certain questions I'm hoping to find answers to. Then I'll be at peace. Yeah, I've always been a man of peace, deep down.
Some people might disagree with that, Sean.
Because of them 12 murders?
She nodded.
I can't even imagine what the families of those men must think about me. 12 bodies, chopped in pieces, spread out all up and down the highways of America.
He peered across the table as he went on, surveying her eyes, the makeup-coated surface of her cheeks, the bright red lipstick around her mouth, watching for any reaction.
A leg in a ditch in Virginia, a severed penis in a field outside Omaha, a frozen heart left in the snow of the Rockies, all those bloody parts scattered like garbage, scattered by the notorious long-haul butcher.
Birdie stared back, her expression set, her mouth a thin, straight line.
Yes, Sean. That is what I was referring to. But we don't have to discuss it today, if it's too upsetting for you. We can talk about something else. Something nice. Would that be better? Perhaps?
She wrinkled her nose playfully.
Your last meal. No one's told me what you've ordered. Readers always find that very interesting.
Is that right? Well, the warden told me that it don't matter much what I order, because most inmates are too nervous to eat any of their last meal. Waste of a good meal, he said.
Birdie sighed.
Yes. I do know that happens sometimes. It did with Thomas Gibbons. Thomas only took one bite of his eggplant lasagna. Then he had to spit it out. And Raj, too. He ordered buttered chicken. But he couldn't even look at it. Just the smell. It made him ill.
Too bad.
So, what meal did you choose?
Pizza.
She grinned.
Classic. I wonder if it's already in the oven. It could be. Are you getting hungry, Sean? Think you'll be able to stomach it?
He shrugged.
A slice or two.
I guess we'll see.
Sean adjusted himself on the chair, rotating his wrists to relieve the pressure of the restraints. Birdie glanced down at the recorder on the table, then over at the door.
You look antsy, Miss Baker. Not getting what you wanted from me today? You worried about the time? 'Cause I'm the one short on that.
Birdie closed her eyes and, putting her hands on her lap, rubbed her palms across the fabric of her wool slacks. Then she smiled and looked up at him.
As you say, Sean, this is your big day. I'm just a guest, here to listen and to take down whatever final thoughts you may wish to share with the world.
Whatever thoughts?
He shook his head with a slow, deliberate rhythm.
No, ma'am. You're trying to stay patient, trying to steer the conversation. But we both know you came here today for one thing and one thing only.
And what's that?
My confession. You got one out of Thomas, and you got one out of Raj. And now it's my turn.
Birdie stayed silent. She didn't bother denying it.
What I want to know is, why? Why is getting my confession so gosh darn important to you? You've talked about closure for the families, but I know that ain't it. Could be to show up the cops, or to keep up your little winning streak as a journalist, or even just get your title quote for the next book. But something tells me it runs deeper.
Meaning?
He leaned in.
You need to hear the words come out of my mouth. Without that, all the work you've put into this feels like a failure, don't it?
Birdie crossed her arms.
What are you getting at here, Sean? With all this talk about me and my books, and are you upset with me? Do you want me to leave? Because I can.
She reached over to pick up her recorder. Sean chuckled.
You ain't leaving, Miss Baker. You're trapped in here, same as me. I won't get out until I'm cold in a box. And you won't leave until you've gotten what you came for.
Birdie paused, looking between the device and the large man in chains across the table.
Can we talk more about your books?
Sean asked.
They're fresh on my mind, and I got some comments and questions. And I want to tell you about my favorite character.
Birdie retracted her hand and smirked.
You do know the way to a writer's heart, don't you, Sean? Just start talking about their work.
Settling herself back in the chair again, she adjusted her cardigan.
But the subjects of my books are not characters. As for your favorite, let me guess. Is it Thomas? A lot of readers love him and a dozen pretty heads. Well, they love to hate him, that is.
It ain't Thomas, no. But his story was certainly a page-turner. That chapter about his childhood almost made me cry. That poor little white trash boy with his dead mama and his druggy dad got no love, no hugs, no presents at Christmas. And then when it got to the part about his teenage years, yikes. All that darkness rising up in his young soul, all his dark cravings, and the violence. Oh my. Smushing goldfish in his fingers, and well, I bet a lot of readers couldn't get through that part about him disemboweling the neighbor's cat while it was still alive.
My readers tend to have a lot of what we call morbid curiosity. They love the part with the cat.
She cocked her head curiously.
Did you like it, Sean? Did it remind you of your own dark cravings? Of the things you've done?
Sean didn't answer, and clearing his throat, he went on.
And of course, Raj's early years sounded even rougher. That poor little boy, slow and sickly, and talk about poor. I mean, he was dirt poor, real poor, I mean. Living in that junkyard slum over in India. And when his family finally made it to America, and you sorta tease the reader into thinking things are looking up, boom! That same bloodthirsty nightmare darkness starts rising up in teenage Raj's heart.
Sean closed his eyes.
That part in chapter 5, when Raj is bending his baby brother's leg further and further to see how long it takes the bone to snap.
Sean released a shaky breath, then looked at her.
You sure can paint a dark, dark picture, ma'am.
I'll take that as a compliment. And yes, both Thomas and Raj displayed an escalating pattern of violence long before they began their infamous killing sprees. It was all there, waiting to be uncovered. It always is.
Not always.
He set his elbows on the table and, intertwining his fingers, leaned forward to rest his chin on his hands.
How in the heck are you gonna write the chapters about my childhood? That's what I want to know. Because I was there, Miss Baker. And sure, I was poor, and my daddy was a real piece of work to me and my sister. But there was never any great darkness in my heart. No pet killing, no bone breaking, no pattern leading to the whole long-haul butcher thing, of which I am accused. Nothing worthy of a Bertie Baker crime story. Not if you tell the truth.
Bertie shook her head and sighed.
Oh, Sean, of course I'll tell the truth. I'm not a novelist. I'm a journalist. I report stories. I don't create them.
Pardon my French, ma'am, but you and I both know that's bull crap.
Oh, really?
Her mouth pulled back at the corners, stretching her lips into a blood-red smile.
Your mama must have raised you right, but your father? Daddy was more than a piece of work. He was cruel, Sean. He was wicked. And what was that phrase you used with your sister? To tell each other it was time to run and hide from Daddy? Wanna go camping? Was that it?
Her smile widened.
I can use that. I can draw a straight line from those early moments right across the pages to a monster sleeping in the cab of his truck, murdering his way across America, swinging an axe down again and again into his victims. All the victims of the long-haul butcher were men, remember? They were all white and bald and bearded, just like your daddy. That's a pattern. It means it's motive. Everything the narrative needs, it's right there.
Sean's eyes blazed and his face twitched, the wrinkles on its left side deepening.
I never killed nobody.
The change in his voice, the sudden depth of conviction, made the hairs on Bertie's arms stand on end.
What's more,
He went on,
Thomas Gibbons and Raj, what's his name, never did neither. Did they, Miss Baker?
For a moment more, Bertie Baker's face retained its look of calm friendliness. Then her eyes went hard, her upper lip twitched and pulled up into a sneer, revealing a smear of bright red lipstick on two front teeth. Reaching over to her digital recorder, she jabbed a finger at the record button, and the red light went out.
Here's what I know, Mr. Mingus. As we sit here, wasting precious time, someone is heating up that pizza pie of yours, and someone else is getting a lethal injection, potassium chloride, nice and cold.
Pretty sure that drug is kept room temp, actually.
Oh, you're suddenly so smart, aren't you, Sean? But I think you've said quite enough. It's my turn to speak. And you really should hear me out while you can. There are things I can offer you, Sean, should you choose to confess on the record to me today to those crimes for which you have been found guilty.
Things you can offer me? Like what? A cozier coffin?
Like financial stability for your loved ones, you fucking idiot.
That wiped the grin off Sean's face.
You didn't expect that, did you? Yes, Sean, I can see to it that the proceeds from your story are directed to your sister. She still lives in your family trailer, right? With her 7 children, a lot of mouths to feed, and all you have to do is give me my quote, and you can go to your grave knowing you at least are leaving something behind for them. That's a hell of a deal if you ask me.
Sean regained composure, considered her words, and exhaled.
You gotta be kidding me. A simple bribe? I figured Bertie Baker's means of persuasion would be far more complicated than that. The Bertie Baker in the books is a genius, a mastermind of manipulation.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about my favorite character. I'm talking about you and the 36 murders you've committed.
Bertie's whole face flinched, as if struck.
Why would... You're starting to sound like quite the conspiracy theorist. I don't know what it is you think is going on here, but I assure you, whatever little story your sick mind is cooking up, whatever you've told your lawyers or the warden or...
Sean's chains jingled as he raised his hands, placed one finger across his lips, and shushed her.
Shh. Quiet down now, ma'am. You're getting riled up. Don't make the COs cut our visit short. I ain't done talking.
Well, I'm done listening!
She stood up so fast that her chair legs squeaked against the floor. Snatching up her recorder, she shoved it into her purse and turned toward the door.
I ain't told anybody my theory,
said Sean, and she paused in her tracks.
I'm still figuring it all out myself, to tell you the truth. It's like I said, I only finished the books this morning. Heck, I'm figuring a lot of this out as we speak. And your reaction right now ain't exactly doing you any favors.
Birdie scoffed and slid her purse on her left wrist.
Goodbye, Sean, and happy execution.
She started walking.
I'll give you your darn quote.
She stopped, halfway to the door, the click of heels on the concrete floor going silent.
You have my word, ma'am. It'll be the last thing out of my mouth before I leave this earth. But only if we can finish our conversation here and now.
Birdie's cheeks flushed.
Very well.
Now blushing through her makeup, she returned to the table, sat, and after a moment's hesitation, drew out the recorder once more.
Okay then, Mr. Mingus. You have the floor. What do you want to talk about?
He glanced over at the door, which remained shut, the shadows of the guards shifting through the door windows. Then he looked back at her.
I want to talk about Birdie Baker.
Birdie blinked.
The me in this chair, or the me in my books?
Didn't you say they're one and the same?
She shrugged.
The books are about the killings and the killers. Yes, I do include certain autobiographical details, but that's only because to do otherwise would be to ignore the impact a journalist has in their investigation.
Don't sell yourself short, ma'am. Your role in the story is much more than that, but it's a bit of a puzzle to see clearly. You drop in all these little hints, see, like breadcrumbs, bits about your own childhood, about your career struggles, about your own morbid curiosity. It's good stuff. Acts as a nice, what's the word? Parallel between yourself and those convicted of the killings.
Is that right?
Uh-huh. You also had it tough in your early days, didn't you, Miss Baker? Absentee father, a mama who was, shall we say, harsh in her judgments. Sounds like she blamed you for just about everything that went wrong in her life. Her husband leaving, money troubles, all of it. That must have been hard. But you rose above all that, didn't you? You got away from your mean old mama. You even put yourself through journalism school. Good for you.
Is this your attempt to psychoanalyze me?
No, ma'am. I'm just telling a story. And like all good stories, it has its ups and its downs. Your career didn't exactly take off after college, did it? Things got hard again. Failed relationships, money problems, rock bottom for Birdie Baker. Then there was that first decapitation, and everything changed.
Birdie nodded, a slow, calculated movement of the head, as on the table, her fingers gripped into fists, the nails digging into the flesh of her palms. Sean straightened up in his seat, raising his head so that the fluorescent lights above glared off the dome of his head and glinted in his eyes.
At age 30, Birdie Baker found herself back in a small Midwestern town, working at a failing newspaper, just when the internet was closing all of them down. She was going nowhere, and fast. That is until the headhunter arrived.
Birdie relaxed her facial muscles with an effort, then did the same with her hands.
Thomas Gibbons.
Sean narrowed his eyes.
It must have been an exciting day for your little paper when a woman's severed head was found on the lawn outside City Hall. You actually knew him, didn't you? Victim number 1, Jackie Scholes. She lived in an apartment above your office. You were even brought in by the local PD for questioning.
Everyone at the paper was. I found the experience rather stimulating. The others were more upset.
No doubt. None of them saw what you did in that killing, and the killings that followed. You saw an opportunity.
I suppose I did.
She straightened up in her chair, her gaze flicking back to the red light on the recorder.
Our little town was suddenly all over the news because of the murders, and the articles I was writing were being reposted by the Associated Press. They talked to me on the news, you know, and when they arrested...
And when new evidence suddenly popped up,
said Sean, cutting her off,
leading them to arrest Mr. Thomas Gibbons, you kept up the stories. You got yourself in to interview him. You even spoke to him on his last day, and you got him to confess. Very impressive, ma'am. Well, I suppose it's less impressive now, knowing you had to...
She moved fast, her right arm darting now, snatching the recorder and jamming the button with her thumb. Sean rolled his eyes. Some of the pride in her expression faded.
The bribe was necessary, and it was clever. Thomas was stubborn, you see, but his wife was ill then, and the medical bills were piling up. But it's like I said, it did calm him down, bring him comfort in his final moments, to read his little script.
She closed her eyes and smiled.
I confess 'twas me. I tracked them down and took their lives. I took their heads, 12 pretty heads.
12 pretty heads,
Sean repeated.
By Bertie Baker. Quite the debut. You were a big star then. Got on Oprah's book club and everything. Were you proud of yourself, Miss Baker?
Bertie opened her eyes.
Of course. I earned that success.
He sat back, sliding his hands into his lap.
We both know what happened next, of course. The book tour, your big move to New York, and then silence. Seems like a whole decade passed without any more big wins for Bertie Baker. Must have been difficult. Knowing that without the gory details of the headhunter's bloody handiwork, you didn't have anything to say that anyone wanted to read.
She opened her mouth to retort. But just then, voices raised in the hall outside. The shadows of the guards moved, and for a moment, both Sean and Bertie were worried the COs would open the door and end the interview. But then the voices faded. Bertie released a pent-up sigh.
We're short on time here, Sean. Do you really want to spend the last few hours of your existence recapping the details of my career?
He swallowed.
Guess I'll jump ahead to when you got, let's call it, lucky again. You found yourself another new serial killer to write about. The Brooklyn Ripper.
Raj Sharvan Mukherjee.
Sure. And when they caught him, after 12 sex workers had lost their lives once again, Bertie Baker was there in his cell to hear him tell his tale and to record his last fateful words. Let's see if I can get him right.
Sean cleared his throat.
Oh God, forgive me. I stabby, I kill her in the night. My hands red with lady blood. How much did you promise to pay his family for saying that?
Bertie chuckled.
Not a damn cent, I'll have you know. Raj was so broken by the end that he would say anything I told him. Like a parrot, like a ventriloquist's dummy.
Huh, is that right?
He nodded toward the recorder.
You gonna turn that thing back on? I'd hate to be misquoted.
No, I don't think I will. This little conspiracy theory you're attempting to build here isn't worth recording.
Fair enough. So where are we? Ah yes, Raj confessed and was executed. And Hands Red with Lady Blood by Bertie Baker came out and sold even more copies than Heads did. It says so in the 3rd edition. That's the one I read. Heck of an accomplishment, ma'am. But that was over a decade ago. Where you've been since then? What you been up to? I don't have a way of looking that up in here.
If you're so smart, Sean, why don't you guess what I've been up to?
He took a deep breath. Despite his best efforts, the impending hour of his own death was starting to take its toll on him, to make him nervous, to make his palms sweat. It was almost over for him. A few more minutes with Bertie, then a slice of pizza, then the gurney and the grave. he exhaled.
I think you've been traveling, Miss Baker, coast to coast. Maybe you got yourself a little RV or a camper van, something old school, since you don't like fancy new tech, like phones or anything that can be tracked.
His lips twitched.
How's my guess so far?
Go on.
July 7th, 2018, I'm guessing, ma'am. On that evening, you were at a rest stop just outside in Eric, Oklahoma.
That's the night you were arrested, and the location.
Yes, it is.
And you think I was there?
He met her eyes and squinted.
Well, somebody put a bloody axe in my truck. Odd thing about that axe, there was DNA of 8 of the butcher's victims on the blade, but the handle had been wiped of any prints. Funny.
She put her elbows on the table.
This story of yours, Sean, where little old me is some ghastly villain, it is intriguing, I grant you. It might even gain some traction online with the conspiratorial-minded folks. But there's no evidence. Who have you told it to so far? Your lawyer? Is she making a final last-ditch bid to the governor to stay your execution?
Sean shook his head.
No, ma'am. I'm sorry to say she is not. If I was a faster reader or a faster thinker, maybe I'd have time to use it, but no. The public wants me dead. And in an election year like this, the governor can't be seen as going soft on crime with any last-minute shenanigans. I know how this day ends. It ends with me in a box.
So then, all this rambling, what's the point? Do you want me to feel ashamed?
A sadness came into Sean's eyes, and he frowned.
I don't think you know what shame is, Miss Baker. I think you are a heartless, merciless killer to the core. That's why you did those terrible things. No. The last thing I'm simply trying to piece together is, why is the confession so important? You already got away with the murders, all 36. 12 for the hunter, 12 for the ripper, 12 for the butcher. All those roles you've played so well and framed so perfectly. But it ain't enough. You need to hear us take the blame. Why?
She stared at him, unblinking, stoic.
Why, ma'am? What is the twisted game you're playing with me?
A twinkle came into her eyes.
It doesn't matter why. I want you to confess. And you will, Sean. Soon. I guarantee it.
Because I promised I would?
Because if you don't, your sister will.
She don't need your dirty money,
he interrupted, but she grinned and shot back.
Because if you don't, your sister will die. That's what I was going to say. And her children will die. And they will die in agony, Sean. I'll make sure of it. Perhaps a fire. Yes, that old trailer. It was an accident waiting to happen. And I will make it happen. That is my promise.
The visitation room went very quiet. Across the table, both Sean and Bertie could hear the beating of their own hearts in their chests, and the breaths issuing from their lungs in and out, measured and even, like a tick-tock of a clock counting down.
The confession. It's the whole point, isn't it?
He said, no anger in his voice, no fear. He was at peace again. He had his answer.
You enjoy the murders, sure, and the success of your little books, but all those bodies cut apart, all that blood spilled, those families shattered, all of that is just setup. The real target is us, Thomas and Raj and me, the 13th victims.
He leaned forward, seeming to glow in the lights, even as she shrank back into the shadows.
Ain't that right, Bertie?
She shuddered at the sound of her own name, her mind rewinding decades back to her youth, to when she was small and panicked and so full of resentment at all of it, at the whole world, with its confusing rules and inherent unfairness.
Fuck you, Sean.
You just can't stand the idea of facing the truth, can you, Bertie? About your brokenness, about all the darkness in your heart. You gotta find somewhere to put it all. So you take a man and turn him into a maniac in the eyes of the world. You make him claim the guilt. And so, be buried with it.
Across the room, the locks clicked and the door swung open.
Time's up, Miss Baker. Inmate Mingus here has a medical check before his last meal.
Birdie blinked, a pair of hot and salty tears falling from her furious eyes. She whipped around to the CO standing in the doorway.
I'm not finished with him!
Sean shook his head, a satisfied look on his face.
Oh, yes, she is.
He clasped his hands and held up his wrists, dragging the chain through its loop on the table.
And I'm getting hungry.
As the guards entered and detached Sean's restraints from their hooks, Birdie wiped viciously at her eyes and cheeks, knocking her glasses askew and messing up her makeup.
It's not too late, Sean,
she said, as they got the prisoner to his feet and led him toward the door.
You still have your last words to make things right. Your last chance to confess.
Chains jingling, Sean shuffled into the hall and out of sight.
Remember what I said, Sean. Remember what I promised.
Birdie didn't usually watch the executions, but when the warden offered her a seat in the witness chamber, she had no choice but to accept. She had to see it, to hear it, to be sure Sean went through with the confession, but of course he would. He had figured it out after all, when no one else could. He knew what she had done, what she was capable of doing. He knew she wasn't bluffing about the sister and kids. It might have been thrilling, having someone finally see and appreciate that side of her accomplishment. But the tension of the minutes slipping by was too much for Birdie to feel anything but agitation. As the stiff plastic chairs filled up around her, Birdie tightened her grip on her purse in her lap and clenched her jaw so tightly that her teeth squeaked together. Another journalist took the seat next to her and tried to ask how the day's interview went. But Birdie didn't even bother responding. She kept her gaze straight ahead, through the two-way mirror on the wall, to the stark, white execution room on the other side, where a nurse and a CO were preparing things. And then he was led in, walking boldly on his own 2 feet, with a guard on one side and the warden on the other. There was a calm expression on his face and a drop of tomato sauce on his chin. The sight of the convicted serial killer caused a great deal of drama in the witness room, mostly from the families of the long-haul butcher's victims. One young man burst into tears and ran from the room. 2 women clung to each other, prayed in hushed voices, and another woman hissed in anger, like a cat. Birdie swallowed, watching as Sean's chains were removed, and he took a seat on the gurney. It was all very anticlimactic. Sean was cooperative, nodding along to instructions, and when asked, he stretched out on the gurney and lay quietly as they strapped down his wrists and ankles, and the nurse took his vitals. Stepping up beside the gurney, the warden cleared his throat.
Mr. Mingus, do you have any final words, son?
Birdie sat forward in her seat, her eyes wide, holding her breath. On the other side of the glass, Sean Mingus lifted his head a few inches, looking from the warden to the two-way mirror, and though there was of course no way for him to see through to the other side, somehow his gaze landed right on Birdie's face.
Suppose I got a few, yeah. Firstly, there's a little matter of a certain book, which I guess I'm supposed to name.
At these words, the journalist next to Birdie chuckled in surprise, and several others turned to look at Birdie in her seat, watching for a reaction. Birdie continued to stare straight ahead.
I'm not much of a writer, but how'd this look on the cover of a New York Times bestseller list?
Birdie swallowed, waiting and waiting.
The Baker's Dozen,
he declared, a glint in his eyes.
How I almost got away with 38 murders by Birdie friggin' Baker, a.k.a. the Maniac Maker.
Next to her, the other journalist gasped. All around the witness chamber, hushed voices whispered to each other in shock and confusion, as every muscle in Birdie's body went rigid in fury. Her fingers turned white as they squeezed upon her purse, so tightly that she heard the plastic casing of the digital recorder with a crack.
That arrogant son of a bitch!
She growled under her breath as Sean settled back against the gurney.
Let's see what the internet does with that one.
Standing over him, the warden looked as confused as everyone else, his mouth hanging open.
Okay then,
He grumbled, looking over at the nurse. Birdie was hardly paying attention. She was shaking in her seat, sweat beaded on her forehead and cheeks. Already, she was mentally planning her road trip to that bastard's hometown. She had said she'd make the murder of Sean's sister, nieces, and nephews look like an accident. But no, a fire wouldn't do. It would be too quick. No, she would take her time with the family, make the mother watch while she carved up the children one by one. She would make them do things to each other, make them eat little pieces of each other, make them hurt each other. Maybe she'd make the children kill their mother. Yes, that was it. It was perfect. It would be the magnum opus to her bloody career, a masterpiece. Through the mirror on the wall, the nurse moved to the gurney and inserted the IV needles into Sean's arms.
Oh,
Sean said suddenly, making Birdie jump in her seat. He looked up at the warden standing beside him.
one other thing, Warden. Somebody get on the horn to my sister. Ask her if she want to go camping. And have her bring all the kiddos. She'll know what that means. Yep.
Nodding, he turned to cast a sweet and supportive smile at the nurse. Then he closed his eyes. Resting back against the headrest of the gurney, he said,
All right then. Let's get her done.
Birdie did not wait to see the moment of his death. As the poison flowed in Sean Mingus's veins, she was hurrying down the prison hallway, her heels clicking, her breath panting, her makeup running from the sweat on her face as she jogged toward the exit. The evening air was crisp and breezy as she moved outside. She fumbled in her purse to get out her car keys and cut one fingertip on a piece of the broken recorder. Wincing, she pulled out her finger and sucked on a tiny wound. It was all too much, the weight of this disaster. Too much. She had to flee. She had to get back on the road and far away from this prison and the son of a bitch lying limp and peaceful on the gurney inside. The man who, in his death, had beaten Birdie Baker at her own twisted game. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the story, be sure to follow or subscribe and share the show with a fellow horror fan. I'll see you in the next one.